November 12, 1944, RAF Woodbridge, England. Visibility just 100 feet, when a B-17 Flying Fortress, tail number 42-31407, emerged from the fog like a ghost, its hydraulics gone, landing gear stuck halfway down, number 4 engine dead, and in the cockpit, First Lieutenant Thomas Crawford faced a choice that broke every rule he'd ever learned in flight school: land backwards or watch 8 men die. The control tower erupted. "Crawford, negative, abort, abort." But Crawford's voice came back flat, calm. "Inevitable, tower. I'm out of options. Wheels won't lock. I'm coming in tail first." Silence. Then disbelief. "Crawford, you're insane. You'll cartwheel." And Crawford's answer, "Maybe, but my crew walks away," as he prepared for a reverse approach. What followed in the next 4 minutes rewrote emergency landing procedures across the Allied air forces, beginning with the most dangerous decision a pilot could make: to ignore instinct, manuals, and regulations, and fly backwards into the fog. This is the story of how laughter turned to silence, how 8 condemned men lived, and how one impossible maneuver became legend. Thomas Crawford grew up in Montana, where winter fog rolled through valleys like ocean waves. His father a crop duster who flew low, read terrain by feel, and trusted instinct over instruments, a mindset Crawford inherited. By 22, he had logged 800 hours. By 24, he was flying B-17s over Germany. His crew called him Backwards Tom, not because of flying, but because of poker. He bet reverse odds, folded strong hands, raised weak ones, and read opponents by what they didn't do. Once explaining, "In poker and in flying, everyone expects you to play forward, but sometimes the winning move is the one nobody sees coming." November 12th began normally with a pre-dawn briefing targeting the Mersburg oil refineries deep in Germany. 824 B-17s and 3,000 fighters. Crawford's 9-man crew on their 28th mission, 3 more to rotation home, careful in the way men get when statistics say they should already be dead. Takeoff was at 0547, formation over the North Sea. Crawford's fortress, Rocky Mountain High, slotting into the high squadron, everything by the book, as Jennings handled radios, Morrison plotted waypoints, Delgado monitored fuel, Kowalski manned the ball turret, Lew and Henderson covered the waist, Washington crouched in the tail, Ali tracked frequencies, and Sturming prepared the Norden bomb site. They trusted Crawford because he never panicked. When flak burst close, when fighters dove through formations, he flew smooth and deliberate, like he was reading a book only he could see. Crossing into Germany at 14,000 feet, cloud cover solid below, intelligence promised light resistance, and intelligence was wrong. At 0847, 50 miles from target, the sky erupted as Bf-109s dove through the bomber stream, cannon fire stitching the formations, B-17s falling, burning. At 0851, the bomber ahead exploded mid-air, and Crawford banked hard, missing wreckage by 30 feet, as flak followed, black puffs blooming like poisonous flowers, the fortress shuddering, metal screaming. "Fighters at 6, Kowalski called, as Washington opened up with twin 50s, tracers arcing while an FW-190 rolled inverted and dove straight at them, Lew walking rounds across its wing route until it exploded, tumbling earthward in flames, 2 more behind it, until Crawford shoved the yoke forward, dropping 500 feet in 3 seconds, slamming the crew into their restraints and spoiling the German attack geometry, the fighters overshooting. "Good flying, Skipper," Jennings said quietly, as Crawford counted aircraft ahead. 4 bombers lost in 2 minutes, the mission unraveling. At 0912, they reached the initial point, Morrison calling headings, Sterling taking control on the bomb run, as flak intensified, shells bursting at exact altitude, shrapnel ripping aluminum, a continuous thunder drowning the engines, small impacts Crawford could feel through the airframe, until a shell detonated directly beneath them, hurling the fortress upward as shrapnel tore through the bomb bay, severing hydraulic lines, red fluid spraying the catwalk. Delgado saw it first, hydraulics failing. Crawford checked the gauges, pressure 0, meaning no brakes, no flaps, no locked gear. Gravity might drop the wheels, but they wouldn't lock, and landing would mean cartwheeling at 120 knots. "Bombs away," Sterling called, as 4,000 pounds fell, the fortress lifting as Crawford banked left, but the punishment continued. At 0924, number 4 engine took a direct flak hit and disintegrated in metal and fire. Crawford feathering the prop, 3 engines left, barely flyable. And at 0931, a pursuing BF-110 walked cannon fire across the right wing, fuel spraying from punctured tanks as Ali tried to balance fuel, but they were hemorrhaging 20 gallons a minute. Jennings did the math. "Skipper, we won't make England," and Crawford already knew. The only question being where to ditch: open water, occupied territory, or risk an English emergency field with no hydraulics, almost no fuel, and fog so thick you couldn't see the ground. At 10:47, they crossed the channel, England ahead, but visibility collapsing as dense gray walls rolled in. Crawford descending on instruments alone, breaking into clear air for 12 seconds at 5,000 feet before the fog swallowed them again. "Woodbridge Tower, this is Rocky Mountain High, declaring emergency, hydraulics gone, landing gear unstable, visibility 0, request immediate clearance," and the tower came back tense. "Rocky Mountain, divert to Manston."
"Better visibility there." "Negative tower. Fuel critical. 1 approach only. Request foam on the runway." "Copy that. Foam trucks deploying. Wind calm. Visibility 100 feet. You are cleared for emergency approach. Runway 27. Crawford descended to 800 feet into solid gray. No horizon, no ground reference, nothing but instruments and instinct, until at 400 feet, Jennings caught a faint glow. Runway lights, dim orange dots bleeding through the murk. Crawford corrected course, then the landing gear warning horn screamed. The main wheels had dropped by gravity, but the indicator lights stained red. Unsafe, not locked. Delgado confirmed it. Gear down, not locked. It would collapse on touchdown. Crawford ran the options in seconds. Belly landing meant a quarter-mile slide and likely cartwheel. Bailout in this fog meant half the crew never reaching the ground alive. Landing on unlocked gear meant flipping at 100 knots. Then Montana flashed through his mind. Winter fog, his father's crop duster, an impossible maneuver he'd seen as a boy. "Tower, I'm gonna try something." "Go ahead, Rocky Mountain." Crawford's voice stayed flat, emotionless. "I'm reversing approach, coming in tail first." Silence. "Say again, Rocky Mountain." "Tail first approach. I'll fly backwards. Touchdown on the tail wheel first. Let the nose settle. Main gear hits last. Minimal impact. Less chance of collapse." "Crawford, that's insane. Your cartwheel." "Maybe, but it's our only shot." He didn't wait for approval. At 200 feet, he pulled power, bleeding speed to 90 knots as the bomber wallowed, controls mushy. He fed rudder, sliding the aircraft sideways, the tail swinging around until they flew at an angle, nose 30 degrees off course, tail leading. "Everybody brace," Crawford said. "We're landing backwards." No one argued. They'd followed him through hell 27 times. In the tail turret, Washington called it out. "Skipper, I see the approach lights. We're drifting left." Crawford corrected, the bomber skidding through fog, tail pointed at the runway, nose into clean air, breaking every rule of aerodynamics because Crawford wasn't flying aerodynamics anymore, he was flying physics. At 100 feet, the tail wheel kissed the foam, barely a bump. Crawford held the yoke neutral and let gravity work. The fuselage settled tail first, sliding through foam like a sled on snow, speed bleeding off, 30 knots, 20, then the nose dropped, the main wheels hit, flexed, groaned, and held. No collapse. The bomber rolled another 200 feet and stopped. Silence. Engine idle. Foam hissing. Jennings stared at Crawford. "You just landed a B-17 backwards." Crawford shut down the engines. "Yeah, let's not do that again." The tower came back, voice shaking. "Rocky Mountain High, you are down. Emergency crews en route. I don't even have words for that." Crawford unstrapped, hands steady as ever. "Tower, we're shutting down. Crew walking out." And they did. 9 men stepping into the fog, staring at their fortress sitting tail first on the runway, nose pitched skyward at 20 degrees, main gear bent but unbroken, foam everywhere. Delgado laughed first, a short bark that turned uncontrollable. Lou joined, then Henderson, until the whole crew stood laughing in the fog, alive when they should have been dead. Fire trucks and ambulances arrived, ground crews frozen at the sight, staring at the skid marks, and Crawford standing calm like he'd just parked a car. The base commander, Colonel Richard Hayes, pushed through the crowd, looked at the bomber, then at Crawford. "Lieutenant, did you just land tail first?" "Yes, sir." "That's impossible." "Apparently not, sir." Hayes studied him, then smiled. "You just rewrote the manual, Crawford. I don't know whether to court-martial you or give you a medal." Crawford didn't blink. "I'll take the medal, sir." Laughter broke out everywhere. Ground crew, fire teams, medics, everyone who'd heard the radio traffic and expected wreckage and bodies, not a bomber parked backwards and 9 men walking away. That night, the story spread through the barracks. Crawford had flown backwards, landed tail first, saved 8 lives with a maneuver no one believed could work. Backwards Tom, once a poker joke, now meant something else. The pilot who bet on reverse odds and won. And it didn't end there. What Crawford did that day changed how pilots thought about emergencies, proving there wasn't always just one way to land. In the months that followed, 3 more pilots used the same technique to save their crews after hydraulic failures. It got a name, the Crawford reversal, added to manuals, taught in training schools, studied by engineers, and every lesson began the same way. They laughed at him, called him insane, until they learned that sometimes the impossible is just the solution nobody thought to try. Crawford finished his tour, 30 missions, rotated home to Montana, never flew combat again, but his legacy lived on in every pilot who learned the reversal and every crew that walked away from a crippled aircraft. November 12, 1944, the day a pilot flew backwards into history and proved that sometimes the winning move is the one nobody sees coming. 3 days later, photos ran stars and stripes, Crawford beside his backwards bomber, the crew grinning like they'd cheated death. Headline reading, "Pilot lands tail first, saves 9. But the photo that mattered never ran. The one taken by an engineering officer that afternoon, showing not wreckage, but a bomber sitting at an impossible angle, gear foam-covered, bent, and somehow still holding.
Captain Henry Morrison from Wright Field's engineering division measured everything. The skid marks in the foam, the angle of approach, the stress fractures in the landing tier struts, and then interviewed Crawford for 3 hours before doing something no one expected. He recommended the maneuver be formally studied, tested, and potentially added to emergency procedures, a suggestion that caused an uproar at 8th Air Force headquarters because generals don't like pilots inventing procedures. It creates chaos, undermines authority, and raises uncomfortable questions about why standard procedures failed in the first place. But Morrison's report was airtight and grounded in physics. When a B-17 landed normally on damaged gear, the main wheels struck first, absorbing the full weight of the aircraft at 120 knots, exceeding structural limits and causing the gear to collapse and the aircraft to cartwheel. Whereas Crawford's reversal redistributed the forces. The tail wheel touched first, carrying minimal load. Friction slowed forward momentum as the bomber settled from tail to nose. And by the time the main gear contacted the runway, speed had dropped to roughly 60 knots, cutting impact forces nearly in half, so the gear held. Simple physics brilliantly applied. Morrison circulated his findings to every bomber group in the European theater. Most commanders dismissed it as too unconventional and too risky, but 3 groups, the 91st, 305th, and 381st, quietly added it to informal training, practicing at altitude, simulating approaches, and learning the feel of the maneuver. 6 weeks later, on December 23, 1944, a B-17 from the 91st lost hydraulics over Belgium, and its pilot, First Lieutenant David Chen, who had read Morrison's report and practiced the maneuver twice at 15,000 feet, faced the same choice as Crawford: bail out over enemy territory or try the impossible. He tried it, landed tail first at RAF Bassingbourn, and 8 men walked away. On January 17, 1945, another B-17 failed over France, and Lieutenant Marcus Reed remembered Crawford's name, reversed approach at RAF Molesworth, and 10 men survived. On February 8, 1945, Lieutenant Thomas Yamaguchi faced the same scenario with the same result: 9 men alive. 3 successful attempts in 3 months, proving the maneuver wasn't luck, but repeatable, teachable, and life-saving. In March 1945, the Army Air Forces officially designated it Emergency Landing Procedure 7B, Tail First Approach for Hydraulic Failure, complete with Crawford's photograph, Morrison's calculations, and step-by-step instructions. Pilots called it the Crawford Reversal, engineers called it Distributed Impact Landing, and everyone agreed on one thing: it worked. Crawford never flew another combat mission after November 12th, completing 30 missions before rotating stateside in January 1945 to training duty at Randolph Field, Texas, where the Army wanted him teaching the maneuver, but he refused, saying he wasn't qualified to teach something he'd only done once, and insisting they use an instructor who'd practiced it. So they did. Captain James Holland, a Wright Field test pilot, flew 40 tail-first landings under controlled conditions, refining the technique, establishing parameters: minimum altitude 500 feet, maximum wind 15 knots, partially extended unlocked gear, approach speed 90 knots, descent rate 300 feet per minute, and trained 20 instructors who then trained 300 pilots. By war end, an estimated 1,500 Allied pilots knew the Crawford reversal. 7 used it successfully in combat, and 63 lives were saved. After the war, civilian authorities studied the technique for commercial aviation and found promise in rare gear failure, low visibility scenarios, but civilian pilots resisted, too unconventional, too frightening for passengers, so it remained a military tool for extreme emergencies. Crawford's crew all survived the war and went their separate ways. Jennings became a DC-3 pilot, Morrison taught mathematics at UCLA, Delgado opened a garage in Detroit, Kowalski worked construction in Chicago, Liu became a doctor in San Francisco, Henderson taught high school in Georgia, Washington ran a jazz club in Harlem, Ali joined the Boston Police, Sterling wrote war novels, always including The Backwards Landing, and they reunited every 5 years at Crawford's Montana ranch, the last time in 1993 when Crawford was 81 and still flying a Cessna 172. When asked if he ever practiced the reversal again, he shook his head and said once was enough. Lightning doesn't strike twice, though it had struck 7 times in combat and dozens more in training, as the maneuver improvised in desperation became doctrine and the impossible became procedure. The B-17 from November 12, tail number 423140 Rocky Mountain High, never flew again. Its airframe stressed beyond repair, salvaged and scrapped, but its nose art was preserved and now hangs at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, beneath a placard that makes visitors stop and ask the same question: he really landed tail first? And the answer is yes, he really did. Crawford died quietly in 2001 at age 81, refusing military honors, always saying he was just doing his job. But his obituary told the truth, describing a pilot who ignored protocol to save his crew, who bet on reverse odds because sometimes the winning move is the one nobody expects, and who proved that innovation doesn't require permission, only courage. Words echoed by his co-pilot Jennings, who said, "Tom taught me that rules exist until they don't, and when you're out of options, you make new ones, because that isn't recklessness, it's survival." A lesson still taught in military flight schools today, when pilots learn that when conventional approaches fail, unconventional solutions save lives, and hear the story of a Montana crop duster's son who flew backwards into legend.
November 12, 1944, the day laughter turned to silence. The day 8 condemned men walked away alive. The day 1 pilot proved that sometimes the impossible is simply the probable that nobody has tried yet. Because in war, survival often depends on thinking differently, and Thomas Crawford understood that instinctively, long before the fog closed in. His poker habit of betting reverse odds mirrored his flying philosophy. Everyone expects forward motion, but physics doesn't care about expectations. It cares about forces, angles, and momentum. And Crawford manipulated those variables not by asking what should work, but by focusing on what could work. Military innovation often comes from desperation, when standard procedures fail and individuals are forced to improvise, and most improvisations fail catastrophically. But Crawford succeeded not through luck, but through understanding. He knew his aircraft intimately, with over 800 hours before combat. He knew how a B-17 responded to unconventional inputs, and that knowledge, combined with growing up flying through Montana fog, gave him the confidence to attempt what others dismissed as suicide. And November 12th wasn't his only contribution to saving lives. Earlier in the war, Crawford had noticed crews struggling with oxygen mask connections at altitude and recommended quick-release connectors, a simple modification adopted across the 8th Air Force by early 1945, saving an unknown but significant number of lives. Crawford never sought recognition. His personality matched his flying: quiet, methodical, effective. He declined interviews, avoided attention, and when historians contacted him decades later, he always redirected credit to his crew, even though they consistently pointed it back to him. As Bombardier James Sterling later wrote, "We lived because Tom didn't panic. Panic makes you follow rules even when rules guarantee death. Tom ignored rules and followed physics." The Crawford reversal became more than an emergency maneuver. It became a symbol of adaptive thinking under pressure. By the year 2000, tail-first landings inspired by Crawford's innovation had saved an estimated 93 lives across U.S., British, Canadian, and Australian air forces. And today the story is taught not only in flight schools, but in business schools as well, under the case study title, "Backwards Thinking: Innovation Under Constraints."
because Crawford didn't ask how to land normally with damaged gear. He asked how to reduce impact forces regardless of orientation, and that reframing changed everything. The 8 men who survived that day carried the lesson into civilian life. When conventional paths close, look for alternatives. None became famous, but all succeeded, crediting November 12th with teaching them resilience and adaptive thinking. Co-pilot Mike Jennings summed it up best years later when he said, "Procedures are guidelines, principles are universal. Master the principles, and you can improvise when the guidelines fail." The men who flew these missions understood sacrifice in ways few ever will, and Crawford's legacy lives on not just in manuals, but in the understanding that innovation saves lives. If this story moved you, please consider liking the video. Every like helps YouTube recommend these stories to more people and keeps this history alive. Subscribe to the channel so these stories are never forgotten. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and whether you or someone you know served during World War II. Next time, we'll tell you about the navigator who saved an entire bomber group using nothing but a broken compass and dead reckoning. Until then, thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.